There are no good obsessions, even when it comes to the most positive things you could imagine. You have to put everything in moderation for the good of others and even yourself. And as I'm sure you may have guessed, today we're gonna be talking a whole lot about obsession. Specifically obsession of the cultural variety, since while I'm sure that you're all quite familiar with weeaboos, hell, you may have even been one at some point, there are a surprising amount of people who are barely, if not at all, familiar with the other types of cultural obsessions out there. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and let me get one thing straight before moving on with the video. There is absolutely nothing wrong with liking a culture, learning its language, and really anything else as long as you actually respect the culture itself. The people I'm talking about today not only end up disrespecting the culture they adore so much, but just end up making themselves look absolutely stupid. So let's start off with the big one, the one that considering you're all denizens of the internet most likely know about all too well by now, weeaboos. Now, weeaboos have been around for quite a bit, with the original term of Japanophiles dating all the way back to the late 18th century. However, it wasn't until the early 2000s that we would begin to see the term have a resurgence under a completely new name. Because you see, before the word weeaboo was brought into existence, there was Wapanese, a combination of white and Japanese. First emerging in approximately 2002, it would end up being the first term to describe a non-Japanese person who was absolutely obsessed with Japanese culture, mainly anime and manga. Though how is it that Wapanese evolved into weeaboo? Well, like many things on the internet, for better or for worse, it somehow always comes back to 4chan. Since from 2003 and on, the appearance of the slur throughout the forums became increasingly visible, most of the time leading to some pretty heated exchanges between anime fans and people who disliked them. 2 years later, in 2005, the word's abuse had grown to massive proportions, even appearing under the radar of 4chan's moderators. So in an attempt to intervene, the moderators devised quite the unique solution. By using the word filter on the site, the moderators made it so every time the word Wapanese was used, it would end up being replaced with weeaboo. And that just begs the question, where in the hell did weeaboo even come from then? Well, in fact, the actual term itself originally didn't even have anything to do with anime or Japanese culture in the first place. It actually came from a little comic strip created by Nicholas Gurwitch, where weeaboo was just a made-up word signifying something undesirable and deserving of punishment. So ever since that fateful day, not only did Wapanese just end up dying off, but the term weeaboo has far surpassed 4chan, now sprawling quite literally all over the internet. Though enough with the history of the term, what about the actual weeaboos themselves? Well, while they do exist out there, believe me, I used to be one around 7 years ago, at this point, the word has become incredibly overused, with many just using it as an insult against anyone who even as much as enjoys something like anime or manga. And on that note, just as a bit of a PSA for you all, if you all know or even as much as meet anyone who actually is a weeaboo, don't be overly rude to them just because. Like, honestly, at the end of the day, it really is just a phase, and with the right advice from a friend, they'll more often than not realize how dumb they're acting. I mean, really, if it worked on me, then I'm sure it'll work on plenty others out there. Though moving on from weeaboos, we'll be going a tad bit more west to the next cultural obsession on the chopping block, Koreaboos, which, as you may have guessed, are those who denounce their own culture and literally call themselves Korean. Though unlike the aforementioned weeaboos, instead of becoming one through an obsession with anime, Koreaboos tend to become obsessed with Korean culture through K-pop for the most part. So since we didn't wouldn't go too in-depth on the actual characteristics of your average weeaboo, since you probably already know them from other videos by now, let's go into the average characteristics of a Koreaboo, since in all honesty, the parallels between the two are stronger than you would imagine. For the most part, when you look at your average Koreaboo, there are a few main traits that separate them from just about any normal person interested in the Korean culture, though by far the largest and most telling trait of them all would have to be their perception of Koreans. Because unfortunately, what ends up happening is through such things as K-pop, K-dramas, and other Koreaboos, these people end up using these various sources as their basic understanding of all Korean culture in general, which leads to some extremely warped perceptions. Like, just a word of advice, you really shouldn't ever base a culture off of its drama shows. They're called dramas for a reason. Like, imagine if someone based all of Indian culture off of this one drama. But back on track, due to them basing their perceptions off of stylized entertainment and third-party sources, Koreaboos end up making vastly broad assumptions about Koreans and their culture, leading to some pretty off-color behaviors. As when a Koreaboo looks at a Korean, they don't see them as a distinct person like the rest of us. Instead, they view them as objects, a warped perception of what they've come to believe every Korean is like. So when Koreaboos actually meet Koreans, or even someone who looks like their favorite Korean idol, you'll end up seeing interactions that aren't even remotely respectful, where usually the Koreaboo will end up expecting them to act like their perceived stereotype of Korean culture, effectively dehumanizing that specific individual in the process. In the end, this mistake is pretty much the exact same one made by your average weeaboo, because you just cannot solely define someone by their heritage. You define them by their personality. Like, seriously, some of these people get so invested in this mindset that not only do they proclaim that they're Korean, they'll even tell other actual Koreans that they aren't quote-unquote Korean enough. Yeah, there are actual people like that. Though like I said with Weeaboos, at the end of the day, if you yourself actually know one, just talking some sense into them will make much more of a difference than actually being mean to them about it. Since even if they're stubborn and won't budge, eventually they'll come to their senses. However, now that we've got the two largest ones out of the way, let's tackle one of the lesser known cultural obsessions that has made itself apparent over the years. Because for this portion of the video, we're gonna talk about Weeaboos. Yes, you heard me right, Weeaboos. People who just through consuming British media begin to believe that they themselves are British. To put it simply, Weeaboos are a more intense version of Anglophiles, who are basically just people who appreciate or admire England, whether it be for its culture or people. In fact, Anglophiles have been around for quite a long time, dating all the way back to the 18th century. I mean, hell, there's so much history behind Anglophiles that it deserves an entire video of its own at this rate. And while there's been quite the British presence in culture all around the world for centuries now, with the boom of it in the 60s being no exception, for this video's sake, I'll be covering only the most recent occurrences of this cultural obsession. Because much like Weeaboos and Koreaboos, Weeaboos usually gain their obsessions through specific forms of British media, whether it be the long-running show Doctor Who, the book series of Harry Potter, and other things much like them. Now, compared to the two aforementioned groups, the presence that Weeaboos have are far more smaller and significant in comparison, with their existence probably being unknown to all of you up until now. Though at the same time, as small of a group as they are, you have to remember not to mistake general fans of those kinds of things, or even people mildly interested in the British culture for them. Because if and when you do, you're generalizing things just as much as they are. And with that, I want to end things off with this. Whether you're a Weeaboo, Koreaboo, Teaboo, or any of the other cultural obsessions out there, let me say that it's never too late to realize the fault in your actions. Because honestly, just coming from me, I myself have a great interest in the Japanese culture, and I've even been on a trip to the country. Hell, I still know basic Japanese from when I was preparing for that exact trip. But at the same time, I'm still very much in touch with my own cultures, not all of a sudden abandoning one for the other. So if you were to take away anything from this video, please don't let yourself become so obsessed with something that you end up completely letting it change you. And if you're one of the people who do the exact opposite and use these few individuals as a gateway to in turn attack anyone who's healthily interested in any culture besides their own, then frankly, you've got your own issues that you should be focusing on. But wait, before I go on to the regularly scheduled outro, I have to remind you all that I stream weekly on Twitch. I've been doing it for the past few weeks now, and I'll even be streaming today at 8 o'clock EST. I'll leave the link for you all in the description. And also remember that I'm gonna be at Anime Expo soon. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe, and today's cool thing of the day would have to be Splatoon 2's Octo expansion. Now usually I don't buy DLC fairly often, but holy shit am I glad I got this one. Now not only is the Octo expansion 10 times better than both Splatoon 1 and 2's single player campaigns combined, but it actually gets really challenging with a story that is definitely not what you're expecting. So don't hesitate. If you've been thinking about buying this DLC, then I say go for it. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.